They're fakes. Good ones. I'll give you that. But they're worthless, the words. Slick with grease and indifference. Cut through the dusty air of the pawn shop. The owner, a man named Stan whose stained polo shirt was stretched tight over his gut, tossed the small, velvet-lined box back onto the glass counter. The medals inside, a silver star and a purple heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, clattered with a sound that felt like sacrilege. The old man on the other side of the counter, Bruce Colton, flinched as if he'd been struck. His hands, gnarled with age and speckled with liver spots, trembled slightly as he reached to steady the box. He said nothing. His silence was a deep well of pain and exhaustion, a stark contrast to the buzzing neon sign in the window that promised cash for gold for a moment. The world seemed to hold its breath, caught in the space between a hero's quiet desperation and a shopkeeper's casual cruelty. This was the cost of being forgotten. Type honor in the comments if you believe our heroes deserve better. Bruce had walked 3 miles to get here. The biting November wind had worked its way through the thin fabric of his worn tweed jacket, a garment that had seen better decades. His small apartment was colder than the street, the heating bill a luxury he could no longer afford. The refrigerator held only a half-empty carton of milk and a single browning apple. Hunger was a dull, constant ache, but it was the shame that truly gnawed at him. The medals were his last resort, the physical manifestation of a life he rarely spoke of, a life of duty, sacrifice, and brotherhood. He had earned them in the choking dust of Fallujah and the labyrinthine streets of Ramadi, places that now felt like fever dreams. Each ribbon, each piece of sculpted metal, was tethered to a memory. The roar of an explosion, the face of a fallen comrade, the heavy silence after a firefight. To part with them felt like selling off pieces of his own soul, but the gnawing in his stomach had finally won the war his pride had been waging for weeks. He had imagined this moment 100 times, but he had never imagined this. He had anticipated haggling, a low offer, even a touch of pity. He had not anticipated utter, callous dismissal. Stan leaned forward, his elbows smudging the glass. "Look, pal," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I see guys like you all the time. You find some knockoffs online, cook up a sob story, and try to pawn them off on me. The engraving is too clean, the ribbon's too new. It's a dead giveaway." He tapped a thick finger on the purple heart. 3 times? Really? Come on. A guy who took that much lead wouldn't be walking in here trying to sell his medals for grocery money. He'd be taken care of. The ignorance in that statement was a physical blow. Bruce's leg, the one with the network of scars hidden beneath his worn trousers, throbbed in bitter irony. He wanted to speak, to defend the authenticity of his own life, but the words were caught in his throat, tangled with a profound sense of weariness. What was the point? To this man, he was just another old face, another story to be disbelieved. He was invisible. His past, his sacrifices were as worthless as the medal Stan claimed them to be. "They're real," Bruce finally managed, his voice raspy, barely a whisper. It was a plea, not a statement. Stan just laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Yeah, sure they are. Now, unless you've got something actually valuable, you're wasting my time." He turned his attention to polishing the counter, a clear gesture of dismissal. The bell above the shop door chimed, announcing a new customer. A young man in the crisp dress blues of the United States Marine Corps stepped inside, his posture ramrod straight, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the grimy shop. He had the sharp, focused eyes of someone who missed nothing. He was looking for a gift for his father, maybe an old watch or a vintage lighter. He gave a polite nod to Stan and a respectful glance toward Bruce, his eyes briefly lingering on the old man's stooped shoulders and tired face. He began to browse the shelves, but the tension at the counter was a palpable thing, thick and sour. He heard Stan's parting shot. "Take your toys and go, old man. I'm not running a charity." The young Marine, Corporal Miller, froze. He had been taught that respect wasn't a suggestion. It was the bedrock of his entire existence. He turned slowly, his gaze falling on the box of medals on the counter, then on the deep, quiet hurt etched into the old man's features. Something about the metals caught his trained eye. They weren't just any metals. The specific combination was significant, rare. He had spent countless hours studying the histories of his core, learning about the heroes who had forged its legacy in blood and fire. He walked toward the counter, his polished shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Stan looked up, annoyed by the interruption, but his demeanor shifted slightly in the face of the uniform. "No problem, Corporal. This gentleman was just leaving. Tried to pass off some fake medals on me." Miller's eyes narrowed. He didn't look at Stan. He looked at Bruce. "Sir," he said, his voice now soft with respect. "May I see them?" Bruce, startled by the sudden defense, looked at the young Marine, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. He nodded silently and pushed the box forward. Miller picked up the silver star, his gloved fingers handling it with a reverence that shamed Stan's earlier carelessness. He examined the engraving on the back, his expression growing more intense. He then looked at the purple heart with its 2 oak leaf clusters, signifying 3 separate combat wounds. He traced the edge of the medal with his thumb. He knew the history. He knew what it took to earn just one of these. To have earned all of them was the mark of a legend. He looked up from the medals and studied the old man's face again, really looked this time, at the faint scar above his eyebrow, the set of his jaw, the profound sadness in his eyes. A memory clicked into place, a photograph from a dusty book in the Paris Island Library, a lecture from a grizzled gunnery sergeant about the ghosts of Anbar province. "What is your name, sir?" Miller asked, his voice barely a whisper. The old man hesitated, then squared his shoulders just a fraction. "Colton," he said. "Bruce Colton." Corporal Miller's breath hitched. His back went rigid and he snapped to the position of attention. The entire shop fell silent. Stan stared, confused by the sudden, dramatic shift. "Bruce Colton," Miller repeated, the name spoken with the weight of history. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Stan's with a cold fire. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think these are fakes?" He held up the silver star. "This medal was earned on November 14, 2004, during the Second Battle of Fallujah. Sergeant Colton's platoon was pinned down by heavy machine gun fire from a fortified position. While everyone else was hugging the dirt, he single-handedly flanked the enemy position through a street that was a kill zone, neutralized 3 insurgents, and cleared the way for his men to advance. He saved 12 Marines' lives that day." He carefully placed the silver star back in the box and picked up the purple heart. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is for the shrapnel he took to his leg while dragging his wounded radio man to safety. The first oak leaf cluster is for the bullet that grazed his temple 2 weeks later while providing overwatch for a convoy. The second," Miller paused, swallowing hard, "is for the wounds he sustained in Ramadi when an IED blasted through him 20 feet. He regained consciousness, ignored his own injuries, and established a defensive perimeter until reinforcements arrived. His actions that day saved his entire squad." Miller's voice echoed in the silent shop. The other 2 customers, who had been pretending not to listen, were now staring openly, their mouths agape. Stan's face had drained of all color, his smug confidence replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed horror. He looked from the young, formidable Marine to the frail old man who seemed to grow taller with every word spoken in his defense. "This man," Corporal Miller continued, his voice rising with controlled fury, "is not just Sergeant Colton to the men who served in Anbar. He was known as the Ghost. He was a scout sniper, one of the best the Corps has ever produced. His confirmed kills are legendary, but what they don't tell you in the official records are the hundreds of lives he saved by being exactly where he needed to be. A silent guardian watching over his brothers." Miller turned back to Bruce, his expression softening from anger to one of profound, almost overwhelming respect. He executed a perfect, sharp salute. The honorific was crisp and clear. "Sergeant Colton." "It is an honor, sir." For the first time all day, Bruce's eyes cleared. The fog of shame and hunger receded, replaced by a flicker of the man he once was. He straightened his back, not with the fluid ease of his youth, but with the defiant dignity of a warrior. He gave the young corporal a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement. The ghost was visible once more. The silence that followed was deafening. Stan looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He stammered, his hands fluttering uselessly. I didn't know. I'm sorry. How was I supposed to know? Miller cut him off with a glare that could strip paint. You don't have to know, he snapped. You just have to show a little human decency. You have to show respect, especially to a man of his generation. He fought for your right to stand here in your comfortable shop and insult him. Miller turned his back on Stan completely, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He faced Bruce. Sir, you will not be selling these. Not today. Not ever. He reached into his own pocket, pulled out his wallet, and took out every bill he had, about $300. He held the money out to Bruce. Please, sir, let me help. My own father's life was saved by a sniper's skill in that same city. He served with the 2nd Battalion. For all I know, you were the angel on his shoulder. Bruce looked at the money, then at the young Marine's earnest face. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He shook his head. I can't take your money, son. You can and you will, Miller insisted gently. It's not a handout. It's a repayment. A small one, for a debt that none of us can ever truly settle. He gently took Bruce's hand and pressed the cash into his palm, closing the old man's fingers around it. Then, with the utmost care, he closed the lid on the metal box and handed it back to its rightful owner. The transaction was complete, but no goods had been sold. Instead, something invaluable had been reclaimed. A man's dignity. As Miller escorted Bruce out of the shop, leaving a stunned and deeply ashamed Stan in their wake, the lesson was clear. True value is not measured in gold or silver, but in sacrifice, honor, and the respect we choose to give to those who have earned it. The medals were not fake. The only counterfeit thing in that shop had been the shopkeeper's judgment. Bruce Colton left not with cash for his soul, but with his honor intact and a powerful reminder that heroes are never truly forgotten. Not as long as there are those who remember what they fought for. The lingering image is of Stan, standing alone in his shop, surrounded by objects for sale, staring at the empty spot on the counter where true treasure had briefly rested. He had been offered a piece of history, a story of incredible valor, and in his ignorance he had called it worthless. It was a mistake he would carry with him for the rest of his life. If you believe every veteran is a national treasure who deserves our undying respect, subscribe to this channel. Let's make sure their stories are always heard.